You are listening to the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR Kutztown. It is 11:30 on Friday, September 8th, 2017, and you are listening to a special live edition of Weather and Climate Chat. For anybody new to Weather and Climate Chat is a weekly podcast that I, Monsoon Mike, and Kutztown University renowned meteorologist Dr. Michael Davis get together every week, or try to do every week, record a podcast and upload it to our website, kutztown.edu/KUR. Click on podcasts, and we talk about the weather in our neck of the woods and also try to do a weather topic of the week as well. But during stormy times or during unusual weather, we try to gather for a special broadcast, and this is one such one we're doing right now. This one is live. We are recording this live at 11:30, and we're also live on the air at 11:30 on Friday. This will be podcasted as well, too, so if it's not that time when you're listening, that means it's a recording. But if you're listening right now at 11:31 on Friday, this is live, September 8th, and we have Dr. Davis in the studio with us because, well, I say this with great concern for our friends down in Florida. It looks like Florida is under the gun of a very serious situation, Dr. Davis.
Yes, we have Hurricane Irma that looks like it's going to be making landfall sometime around early Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And the models seem to be in general consensus of it bringing it pretty much in the southeastern Florida, around the Florida Keys area. And after that, some of the models do diverge as to what exactly the path of Irma is going to be. You and I were talking off air before we came on the air, I should say, that the GFS model looks like it's still trying to cling to that eastern solution, where it's pretty much going right up the coastline, while you have the British models that are starting to look like it's going to be going more up the western side, so it could be going up the other side of Florida.
Right.
And then the European models pretty much driving it right down the center of Florida.
Now, first we should try to break this down as much as possible, because a lot of people aren't weather geeks like you and I are. A lot of people would just look at the satellite picture, they see this storm moving kind of west-northwest, and they say, okay, if I was to draw a straight line west-northwest, it's not going to really be an issue for Florida. But all of the models are indicating this kind of hook to the right. What is driving the storm to why are the models, and why do we think that storm is going to hook to the right?
Well, earlier this week, around like Wednesday, we had a very deep trough that was set up across the central part of the United States, stretching from all the way Canada to the Gulf Coast. And that trough is now starting to lift in the past couple of days. And that's what's given us around northeast some cooler weather recently. And as that trough pulls out, we're having a very strong Canadian high-pressure system move in behind it. And with the absence of that trough, you have Irma now free to essentially move up to more northerly direction.
Right.
And she's also not going to be steered by the subtropical high, which is currently sitting near Bermuda. Mm-hmm. And you also have a high-pressure system that is starting to develop around the panhandle region of Texas into Colorado. And the way how I've been explaining it to my students is you have the high pressure pretty much acting like a stone in a river, and you have the one larger stone that's going to be in the northeast, another large stone which is going to be around Texas, and there's a gap right in between them. And then that's going to allow Irma to pretty much shoot the gap and go between the two stones and move up into Florida and then into the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley.
So people don't realize how trying to forecast a storm like this really is such an amazing, intricate science, because we're talking about the distance of maybe 100 or so miles with this track that could mean totally different effects for different cities in Florida.
Correct. You have just a slight change of about 50, 100 miles or so in the track could mean devastation for some area or very little damage.
Now, a lot of times you'll hear folks say that, and I'll get your opinion on this, generally they say the right side of hurricanes are generally a little more destructive than the left side. Is that true, Dr. Davis?
That is correct. We refer to that as the right front quadrant in hurricanes. Typically with hurricanes is as they're rotating around and at the surface you have low pressure with the hurricanes. In this case, it's going to be very intense. in the northern hemisphere, low pressure goes counterclockwise.
Correct.
So you have the winds essentially moving with the storm on the right side of the storm, but on the left side, they're moving against the storm. So the winds are actually a little bit calmer, or a little bit weaker, I should say, on the western side of the hurricane rather than the eastern side in the northern hemisphere. If you reverse it in the southern hemisphere, because of the Coriolis effect.
Gotcha. So, I mean, if you're looking at the models, I guess you would say, I mean, either way, no matter what model you go with right now, it looks pretty serious for Florida. But I guess if there's any model that you would want to, I don't know, maybe favor slightly, I guess the GFS was the one that's closest to the coast, so that would tend to put Miami, which is the city that everybody's talking about, a little bit not so much on the right side. Whereas other models, like the Euro model, pretty much put Miami dead right on the right side, as well as the Canadian and the NAM model as well. So, but again, we're talking about the difference of 50, 100 miles here. So either way, you're pretty much, if you're in that part of Florida or any part of Florida pretty much right now, you want to be preparing, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Irma does mean business and is going to be a very dangerous and powerful storm coming into the Florida Peninsula. I don't think Irma's going to go out to sea. Some of the models do still want to hold on to that last vestige of that. Yes, it's going to go out to sea, but the general consensus is that it's going to hit Florida at some point, whether that be down the south end or the middle or the northern ends. Now, I personally do favor the GFS, and I do think that one has been generally showing the greatest consensus of what's gone on so far with Irma. And I do think that's probably the best solution that Florida could hope for, and putting most of the peninsula on the western side of the low and the left front quadrant rather than the right front quadrant. I think if it goes the European model, we're going to be in a world of nightmares down in Florida.
Yeah, and actually talk about, live fresh radio here. As we're talking, the new GFS is running. It's running right now, but it's just out to 30 right now, so it pretty much has it still a couple hundred miles south. Let's see how that compares to this 6 so we can see.
What's its pressure?
Pressure 919.
Okay.
And that's a couple hundred miles south of.
It's still deepening, intensifying.
Yeah, and I'm just comparing it to the 6 in practically the same spot. So we're probably going to have a similar solution. But if we keep talking long enough, we might see some more frames coming in here, and we'll be able to see that a little bit more. Okay, so yeah, I would say Miami is definitely under the gun for perhaps some of the worst of this. The Keys are pretty bad. All along the east coast of Florida, that looks pretty serious as well, too. And what's interesting about the track of this storm, I'm not sure I've ever seen, at least in my life, if this track holds true, a storm go pretty much perfectly up the spine of Florida, like, the I-4 or whatever that highway is in the middle of Florida. I've never quite seen a storm do that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think I've heard of any hurricane that's gone directly up the Florida Peninsula.
Right. So that would also affect, Miami would obviously take the hardest hit. I mean, and if the storm stayed over land for a while and went up the peninsula, it would weaken. But a storm this strong is not going to weaken that quickly. And that still puts cities like Orlando, Tampa would be theoretically on the left side of the storm. So they would be not quite as bad, but still pretty bad. And Jacksonville and all of the East Coast beaches of Florida, pretty serious conditions.
I do think that there might be a chance for some weakening if a few things happen. One is if the low goes a little further west before it makes that turn to the north, in which case you're encountering more of Cuba and the mountainous areas of Cuba, which could essentially weaken the storm.
That's true.
And another one is that we were looking at the wind shear effect that was going on, pretty much set up around Lake Okeechobee and places further north is where you would have the greater amount of wind shear.
Right.
And wind shear diminishes or weakens hurricane intensity. So that could work in at least the better part of weakening Irma.
Right. So
now, whether those two factors come into play or not remains to be seen, but Irma's still going to be packing quite a punch.
Right. So right now she is at 11 a.m. The advisory number 38 she was at 150 miles per hour winds.
Top end of Category 4.
top end of Category 4. Do you see a lot of change with that, whether weakening or possibly increasing over the next day before we landfall or so?
I personally don't see it going back to Category 5. I think it's going to stay at the Category 4 just because of all the land that surrounding it, with like Cuba and Bahamas and southern Florida. They're kind of interacting with the storm itself. There will be some fluctuations in Irma based on strengths or greater amount of moisture being brought in, or the shearing effect or topography, but generally I think we're going to be sticking around the top Category 4.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about timing. We haven't talked about timing that much. It looks like if we're following the GFS, they all kind of agree on timing. It's just the little details of exactly where the low pressure is located that they disagree on. But timing-wise, it looks like this gets rolling for South Florida. We're looking about tomorrow afternoon-ish, Saturday around 2 o'clock. You see the isobar is closing in on Miami, and things start to go downhill pretty fast. Then tomorrow night, it's not going to let me go out too far because it's still running. That's a 12, so I'll put it back on the 6. Tomorrow night around 2 a.m., Sunday morning, it's pretty bad. Looks pretty bad over South Florida, so that's kind of scary because storms are scary enough, but when they're happening in the middle of the night, that's even spookier.
It's
893.
893.
Yeah, 893.
For pressure.
Yep. And then, wow, this actually has it increasing a little bit just before landfall. Looks like 891. This is Sunday around 8 a.m. And that's probably, if I zoomed in enough there, probably would be, at least that's what the 6Z GFS is saying would be around roughly landfall, like early Sunday morning. And then we're over land, and we see some weakening. It's up to 904. And
that's to be expected.
And that's Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, going up the spine, Orlando-ish area, Monday morning, like around 2 a.m., so scary times in the middle of the night, Sunday into Monday, Jacksonville-ish type area, early Monday morning, like around 7 or 8. And then this is something that nobody's really talking about, because we're focusing on, wishing Florida the best. But this storm is so powerful that even when it gets into Georgia and goes up to Atlanta, Atlanta's not going to have catastrophic damage, but Atlanta's going to have a pretty nasty, ugly, horrible Monday into early Tuesday, it looks like.
Yeah, Irma's going to be holding herself together for Monday to Tuesday morning, and that could be a pretty messy situation down in Atlanta.
Right.
The one thing I will say about Irma, too, in terms of timing, is that it's moving pretty fast.
Yeah, that we should stress that. This is not going to be as catastrophic as Irma, unfortunately, might be. This is not going to be any Harvey that's going to stall for 5 days, right?
Yes.
Good.
Besides the fact of it being a faster-moving storm, that also means that the storm surge is likely going to be more dangerous. You also have the winds that are going to be impacting Florida as well.
So whereas Harvey was best known for the catastrophic rains, this storm will be known more for wind surge or storm surge.
The inland flooding threat I believe to be somewhat minimal with this compared to the other more destructive factors like storm surge and wind.
So this storm is more of a storm surge and wind storm, whereas Harvey was more known for its rain. Gotcha. And then just for anybody asking, just because occasionally you and I are asked, are we going to have any effects of this storm? Yes and no. We're going to have indirect effects possibly, but nothing. By the time it starts fizzling out over Tennessee, we might get a little bit of off-shooting rain up here Tuesday into Wednesday, a little bit of wind, but not really looking worse than just a light rain for this area.
Yeah, for our area, it looks like Tuesday into Wednesday is probably going to be a little bit rainy. The wind doesn't really look like it's that big of a factor.
No, maybe a little bit, maybe a little breezy, but nothing.
Kind of similar to what we had with Harvey last week when the remnants were coming through.
Right. And then kind of just fizzles over Tennessee and another low pressure forms near us and moves off and just gives us a couple of showery days mid next week. Okay, what didn't we cover? We covered the... at this point, if you're listening from Florida, and we actually have some people that said they were going to listen to us, some friends of us that were family that said they were going to listen.
Shout out to Ruth, Don, April, and Shannon.
what can people do at this point? I mean, if they're going to ride out this storm, tell us where some safe spots to go in your house. I mean, any ideas along those lines? Just trying to, share some thoughts here.
Generally, with hurricanes, you want to make sure you have your plan in place before the hurricane comes in.
So I hope a lot of people are pretty ready by now.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah.
You've seen pictures probably of people boarding up their houses or putting storm shutters on, essentially try to keep the wind out. It's essentially, maybe I should say it this way. When Irma was getting about 180, 85 miles an hour, that was almost a EF4 approaching EF5 tornado there.
Yeah, right.
And with it being about 400 miles wide or so at one point, I believe it's gotten a little bit bigger since then, that it was pretty much a giant tornado. So for those of you here in the Pennsylvania, more local audience, is pretty much a tornado that might be coming, but several days in advance. And those situations, the ramifications, I should say, of that storm are going to linger for several days down in Florida.
Okay, so as we're recording this, the 12Z GFS is running, and a little bit of breaking news here. It looks like it has jogged ever slightly to the west, which is not a good thing, because then that puts Miami under the full. I'm looking, here's 6. These websites are so slow because everybody is loading them up here.
Well, we have been seeing a westward trend in the GFS.
So
over the past couple days.
So I just want to try to increase the size of the screen here. It's so slow. This is the 6. All right, here we go. Here's the 12, and it's out as far as. Okay, here's 54 hours. This is Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon-ish. And I'm going to try to blow up the screen as much as possible here. Yeah, pretty much has the low now. Now pretty much has the low over like southwest corner of Florida. And going to the next frame. Yeah, it has a little further west. The new GFS is a little further west, so taking dead up the center of Florida, it looks like. So Tampa looks to be on the slightly weaker side, but this is even not going to be that far from Tampa. So we could even see some pretty serious effects in a city that we haven't really mentioned that much, Tampa.
Yeah, and the Hurricane Center was talking about the general westward shift in previous model runs.
Could that westward, based on the position of the high pressure and stuff, could that potentially continue happening, and we see more of a westward shift, and this thing somehow wind up?
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities at this point.
Okay.
If you're listening from the Tampa area, it very well could be coming closer toward your way, depending on where exactly the high pressure in the northeast gets situated.
Okay.
You're looking at the GFS right now,
right.
aren't you?
It's running right now.
The high pressure's centered right on western New York right now.
Right.
If that starts shifting more towards, say, New England,
right,
then I'd be more concerned with what's happening around the Tampa area.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so we're into the final moments of our little segment right here. I was just going to say something and I forget what it was. Okay. Well, I can't remember exactly what I was going to. Oh. We should always mention that, and just put a little public service announcement out there that with this storm and with the power of social media is a wonderful thing, but it can also be a dangerous thing because there's a lot of, hypesters that don't always share accurate information. People should be watching or paying attention to what would you say is the most reliable? The National Hurricane Center, correct?
I would say the Hurricane Center, yeah.
Absolutely. So
they have a lot of brainiacs over there that it's their job to study hurricanes and stare at computer models all day. So
it's just Google National Hurricane Center, and it's also nhc.gov, I believe. Will take you right there. And they'll pretty much, you can see wind speed probability. It's a great website because you can narrow down wind speed probabilities, and it shows you, probability of tropical storm force winds in like certain cone wind history, their interactive map. potential rainfall. We haven't really talked about rainfall. We're not really, like I said, we're not worried about catastrophic flooding with this one.
Again, because it's moving so quickly.
But we're still looking at a good 1, 2, 3. I'm just counting how many layers here. 6 to 10. Still could be 6 to 10 inches, 10 to 15 inches over, parts of South. So that's still a respectable amount of rain, but at least we're not looking at catastrophic flooding.
For our local audience, that was pretty much similar to what we had with Sandy when she came on shore. So I think we had about 6 to 8 inches or so in this area.
So if there's any glimmer of hope with this storm, it's that we continue. It's moving quicker, obviously much quicker than Harvey. So we're not going to see catastrophic flooding, but it's much more of a wind type storm and a storm surge type storm, with at least the latest QPF mostly straight up and down all the East Coast beaches of Florida. So. All right, I think we pretty much covered everything, Dr. Davis.
I think we did, yeah.
Are you going to be posting anything over the weekend about the storm on your social media?
I will attempt to.
Okay. I will attempt to as well, too. So just give a quick shout-out to where we can find you.
I'm at the Facebook page of Dr. Michael Davis, WX, for WX meaning weather forecast in meteorology lingo.
Okay, and I'm Monsoon Mike's Weather Headquarters. And again, I mean, you and I generally focus on weather in our own area, and here the weekend's going to be beautiful, total opposite of what's going to be going on in Florida. So, and unfortunately, it's that beautiful weather in our area that's going to be driving that storm because it's that high pressure system that will be affecting where Irma goes.
That's right.
So nice weather here, not so nice in Florida. Our thoughts and our prayers and best wishes go out to everybody down in that area.
Indeed.
And we also got to put out there, one of my students brought up a good point about blood drives. I know Red Cross is doing a lot of blood drives around the area. They're still looking for blood for the Harvey storm, and I'm sure unfortunately might be and we didn't even touch what Irma did out in the Caribbean. She just totally tore up some islands out there.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, and
it was pretty scary what she did over there, and I really hope we don't see that repeated in southern Florida.
Yeah, I mean, there's some islands I think Barbuda, which is not to be confused with Bermuda. There's Barbuda. It's a tiny little resort island, and I think 95% of it is pretty much pulverized. So there's
widespread damage across there.
And then there's other islands that they said they've lost all communication with, no information going in or out. So we don't even know how bad some of those little islands are.
Yeah, that should be enough to heed the warnings that are being given from Irma.
Right. Okay. Well, Dr. Davis, thank you so much for talking with us, and watch us on our pages. And, of course, go to the Real Professionals at the Hurricane Center for updates throughout the weekend if you are down in that neck of the woods. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Stay tuned. This has been a Weather and Climate Chat. Going to play a couple songs here, and then coming up at noon after the news, we got Margot on the air with Stuck in Your Head on KUR. Have a great day.